Anyway, ik ga een ontdekking racer worden.
Midsummer in the Red Sea, and the jacks are pairing off, shadow dancing. One half of each pair turns black, and the couples promenade in lazy undulations. It's the breeding season for a lot of Red Sea fish. The Silversides have reformed their shoals. While this is excellent protection, it's no guarantee of peace. Even in the late morning lull, almost every fish that passes takes a peck at them. Flute mouths will pause to needle them, even at the risk of attracting the attention of a grouper. The general pandemonium leaves the whole shoal writhing like a tormented ghost. The ship gives the reef fish a choice of breeding surfaces, and these damselfish have opted for the uncluttered deck. The female lays and the male fertilizes. That stage of the process is easier and more thorough on a flat surface, but it means that eggs will have to be guarded. The white-bellied damselfish hide their eggs in cracks of the reef. The triggerfish keeps its eggs in the open, but in a sand nest at the edge of the reef, where it not only has to defend them from an onslaught of butterfly fish, but between attacks, try to keep them ventilated. It's a term of duty that lasts for a day or two before the larvae hatch and float off to take their chances in the plankton. For the triggerfish father, there's no time for either eating or sleeping. And at this hour, it's like working a daylight graveyard shift. These animals may live in the sea, but midday is midday and siesta time.
pleasant versus more unpleasant. And one further thing is that in previous studies of other types of emotions, such as fear, for example, there are other responses in different parts of the brain that we did not see in our study. So this is sort of support for the fact that different emotions involve maybe different neural networks, or at least activate different structures in the brain.
What can we say this tells us about music and emotion, do you think?
That music and emotion versus music, say, the way that a musician would perceive music are very different things. That different parts of the brain are involved in having an emotional response to music and being able to understand music in sort of a music theory sort of way. And this makes a lot of sense because obviously you don't have to be a musician to have emotional responses to
tone, melody, pitch and rhythm, yet we can recall it clearly. What is it that enables our brains to remember such a complex piece of information? And how do we hear music in our heads when it's not being played? Psychologist Robert Satori calls this musical imagery and is investigating which bits of our brains allow us to imagine music inside our heads.
The vast majority of people, if you simply ask them, can you close your eyes and think of, a certain tune, they will say, oh yes, I can hear it quite clearly. And you can even ask people things like, okay, now can you hear that same tune played by a brass band? And they usually say, yes, I think I can hear that now. And then you say to them, okay, now imagine that tune played by a piano. And they can imagine that as well. So this is a marvelous ability that we seem to have. And one of the scientific issues that we thought we should investigate is, how is it that the brain allows this particular ability? Just like it has visual imagery, where you can think of what a certain person's face looks like, or what the front of your house looks like. You can also have this internal representation, this internal image of music in your mind. And so we've done some scientific studies where we look at the brain activity that accompanies the act of imagining a piece of music. And one of the things that we find is that the same part of the cortex that is normally responsible for the processing of sound is also active when you are imagining a piece of music. And in that particular study, we also found that it was very much on one side. It was on the right side of the brain, not on the left. So that goes along with the idea that the left side is more specialized for language, whereas the right side is more specialized for processing of tonal music, such as a melody.
And you were saying that the brain sort of scans the music in your head. Does that have any implications for memory?
As you are thinking of a tune, it unfolds in time. It happens in real time. As you're thinking of the tune, you play it out, as it were, over time. So what that tells us is that the memory for that tune, the information, is contained in your memory store in an organized sequence that is organized, including the time component. Now this is quite different from other kinds of information storage, where you might be, for example, if I ask you, let's say, what is the capital of China? You know that information. Now, you don't have to scan it in the same sense. It's just a fact. It's a piece of information that you have stored, and you can retrieve it. Whereas when I ask you to think to yourself of the tune Jingle Bells, to do that, you unfold it over time. So what that tells us is that there are different kinds of memory representations, that the nervous system has different ways that information is maintained in memory. Some types of information are simply stored as units. Other kinds of information, in particular musical sequences, are stored in a different kind of way, which probably is related to the fact that it's very close to the original sound. It's not just stored abstractly as knowledge, but it's stored as much more similarly to the original sound.
And I was reading something earlier today that was talking about how we often wake up in the morning with a tune running through our heads. I mean, has your work been able to give us any insights into why we would do that?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions of that. I've gotten letters from desperate people who say, I can't get this tune out of my head. It's driving me crazy. I'm beside myself. I don't know what to do. No, I don't know how to cure that at all. But I think some of the work that we've been doing maybe will help to shed some light on that, because not only do you play the tune out, that's really what we're studying, is how that process happens, but you also have to have a sort of control process that plays it out and then stops it, right? And what seems to happen in those people who can't seem to control it, or in people who, for whatever reason, it happens to me too, I'm trying to go to sleep at night and I've had a hectic day and I'm a little bit uptight about something, and I'll have some stupid little musical jingle going through my head and I can't stop it. Probably what happens is that in an anxious state, or for whatever reason, the normal control process that allows you, first of all, to activate that memory trace, then to play it out, and then to stop it, that control process is somehow disturbed. So it's not the auditory image mechanism itself, but it's something else which normally would trigger it and monitor it and control it and stop it. It's that other process which is probably somehow disturbed, and it then lets the other one run loose without any control.
Robert Satori showed how music can produce powerful images. And we all know how on a day when everything has gone horribly wrong, we wish we were somewhere else, and can conjure up images of, say, relaxing by a beach or sitting quietly in a garden. Strangely, some blind people not only have the ability to produce images, in some very rare cases, their brains allow them to see things, even though they are blind. Dr. Alan Petito studies the... Dr. Alan Petito, Alan Petito, Alan Petito, Alan Petito, Alan Petito, Alan Petito, Alan...
explain one thing, they will say, but what about this other thing? And they keep on jumping from one thing to another thing to another thing. It's not soul, and it's there's a term in philosophy called intentionality. And if it's not that, then it's self. And if it's not self, then it's the I, capital I. And if it's not that, then it's something else. And they keep on saying, but you could capture this mechanically, but not that. I think we're just going to have to open our minds up to the reality of complex structures, complex mechanisms, having more and more of what we call consciousness. And when they do, they will start talking about themselves using the word I, as we do. And if they use it with all the same kinds of subtlety and finesse that we do, I think it's going to be hard to deny to them that they have an I, to deny that they have a soul, if we have souls. To me, the word soul is really just synonymous with consciousness. It's not any different from it. I don't think you change the question. You say, okay, consciousness, we can imagine a machine having but not soul. I would go further and I would say, once you admit the idea that a machine could perceive, could be a perceiving being, I think you've gone as far as you need to go in saying that it would have some degree of consciousness and the same degree of having a soul. If you want to use those terms. In other words, the critical part of all of this is the perception. That's what really matters. And once you get that, the rest of the words that go along with consciousness
choice of surgery, which has some risks attached to it.
I can still remember the day when the professor wrote to me and the letter arrived explaining that I'd passed the assessment for surgery with flying colours. And he wrote to me and gave me a 70% chance of becoming seizure-free, a 29% chance of not really being any better or any worse, just staying the same, and a less than 1% chance of anything really going wrong, like a stroke or death, and a very, very small chance of losing the top field of my vision, and a small chance of having emotional problems afterwards because the damage was in my right temporal lobe, which controls your emotions.
And what did he say to you about losing your vision? Because that's obviously a really scary thing.
I think that frightened me more than any of the others. I wasn't frightened so much of the emotional problems. I thought I'd get through that, but certainly the vision was the one that I worried about the most.
When Sally woke up after operation, the first thing she saw was a clock, and she realised that the operation had been a success. In very rare cases, the price to pay for a seizure-free life is a partial loss of sight. But what has interested scientists is that although the part of the brain which controls sight has been removed, they still manage to see something. This has been called blind sight. Dr. Alan Petito is fascinated by this phenomenon, but not everyone who might have blind sight does have blind sight, so he needs to test people.
What we did initially is we presented targets, we flashed targets, lights if you like, in their blind field. And we controlled their eye movements, so we monitored their eye movements, so we made sure that we were presenting the stimuli in their blind field. And we asked them to localize the targets by pointing to where they thought the target was presented, because them too would deny that anything was presented. So they were, again, they showed some good abilities to localize targets in their blind field, even though they were denying that they were seeing them.
They don't know what they're seeing, they just know there's something there.
Yes, exactly. So they are not able to identify, for instance, complex objects that you would present in their blind field. Although we have observed in a couple of cases an ability to discriminate very simple geometric figures.
And how do you think this works?
Well, there's obviously, these patients have had lesions early in life, and there's obviously some reorganization that has taken place in the brain. And what we want to know is how does the information travel, and where does it go, and where is this processed? So what we have been doing is using neuroimaging. That is, we would like to see the brain in activity when we present stimuli in the blind field and what is happening there. So we've tested 4 subjects with functional magnetic resonance imaging. And what we've observed is that one subject showed activation in the remaining cerebral hemisphere after we've stimulated the blind field. So the information somehow got from the blind field to the remaining hemisphere. And this is very interesting because it means that there is definitely a process, that the information is being processed. And how does it get to the remaining hemisphere? And we believe that the subcortical mechanisms structured called the superior colliculus, or another possibility is a pulvinar of the thalamus, would be involved either as a relay station to the remaining hemisphere, or the information may be processed there even. In support of a relay hypothesis is the fact that we see activity in the remaining hemisphere.
So what you're saying is that the information is coming into these other bits of the brain and somehow being pushed to the appropriate bit of the brain that will give you sight.
Yes, that's right. And but we only saw this in one patient. In the others we didn't. And this one patient is the one that in fact has the most residual abilities. Another way that we tested blind sight is through a very simple paradigm. The idea is when you present to a normal subject 2 lights, and you ask them to respond as quickly as they can, they will usually respond more quickly to 2 lights than to a single light. 2 is better than 1.
That's simple.
So what we've done is we present in one field, in the blind field, 1 light, and the intact field another light simultaneously. And what we've observed is the response of the subjects to these 2 lights is quicker than if we presented 1 light in the intact field only. So somehow the information from the blind field is helping the response and making it quicker. So there is an effect from the blind field on the intact field to make the response more efficient.
For the patients themselves, the sight isn't of practical use at the moment, but the hope is that eventually it will be possible to develop it and improve their everyday lives. Surgery is a last resort for those people with epilepsy who cannot be treated by any existing drugs. And you might think that it will take new ideas to produce drugs to treat these small groups of patients, but think again. A 19th century Spanish physiologist suggested a way that might be used to control nerve transmission. All our thoughts and actions are under the control of our brains. When we wake up in the morning, go to work, talk to our friends, everything we do is controlled by the billions of nerve cells, known as neurons, which lie in the brain and spinal cord. The commands dictated by the neurons are delivered by long, thin channels called axons. But inside the body is a tangled web of tissues. So how does the brain know which are the right axons to send the messages along? So we move our left leg and not our right, wiggle our toes and not our fingers.
Cuando aparecen las primeras sustancias químicas que atraen las neuronas, lo hacen en la periferia y no en el sistema nervioso central. De este modo, resulta apenas natural que los nervios de la espina dorsal...
Writing over 100 years ago, Santiago Ramón y Cajal thought he had a solution to how the messages went to the right parts of the body. Cajal said that the answer to the mystery was that the target cells sent out special chemicals, now known as netrins, which attracted the axons to make the right connections. No one believed him because he couldn't find the chemical. Medical technology was simply not sophisticated enough. 100 years later, Tim Kennedy decided to investigate Cajal's theory.
When I was a postdoc, I was working with a guy named Marc Levine at the University of California in San Francisco. And together with a group of people, we purified and cloned and characterized the netrins, which turned out to be a family of medium-sized proteins that promote the outgrowth and direct the outgrowth of developing neurons during the development of the nervous system. We know now that they're critically involved in that if you lose netrin function in the developing nervous system, that major connections made by neuronal cell types are not made, and that the axons don't find their way to their targets, and in fact get lost on the way to where they're supposed to be going.
Do we lose netrins as we get older? Is that something that would actually involve in the aging process?
Well, before going to that question, what I've said so far is that netrins are present in the developing nervous system, and it actually, their existence was proposed over 100 years ago, and finding them, actually isolating the entity and saying that they are there and they were doing what was a variant of what was proposed 100 years ago was very exciting. That was all neural development. What's intriguing for us is the observation that netrins are present in the adult nervous system, that they continue to be made in the adult nervous system by a very restricted group of cell types. What we're interested in a very general sense, is if you have these proteins that you know play a critical role in neural development, what might they be doing in the adult nervous system? And is it possible that they're involved in the day-to-day functioning of the nervous system in terms of things like plasticity, meaning related to how the nervous system changes with experience, perhaps things like learning and memory, or in addition, in the context of injury or neurodegenerative diseases, would they play a role in regeneration or maintaining the health of the nervous system? And then going beyond the adult, or let's say the normal middle-aged adult, and going into an older adult and saying what is their role in aging would be an additional question that you could add on to that.
Would you expect to develop, for them to play a part if you're learning a new skill?
Potentially things like this, almost by necessity, have to be involved. So that if learning and memory involves changing the strength of synaptic connections in the brain, then you have to ask the question, what is the biochemical mechanism that underlies that change in synaptic strength? If something like a netrin, or there are lots of candidate proteins that are involved, just generally in terms of neural development, how you put the nervous system together, and how does it work in the adult? We want to bring 10,000 axons to connect up to target neurons. In the adult, in the context context of something like learning and memory, you only need to change a few connections.
What about when you have a suffered trauma to the brain? What happens to netrons then?
It likely depends on the type of trauma that's involved, and what the lab is doing now is specifically looking at certain types of regeneration in the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, and also traumas that involve changes in activity, very dramatic changes in activity like epilepsy.
What's the implication for perhaps medicine in the future? I mean, we're looking a long way ahead, I guess.
I think if you have a damaged nervous system, you really need to do at least two things.
It was something else, which we didn't know what it was.
is snow, and everywhere the berry went, the lamb was sure to go.
Never before has a human voice been recorded and then played back. That was the first word spoken by Mr. Edison on a talking machine. We'll turn it back to the beginning.
That's simply amazing. I don't think it's any accident that when Edison invented the phonograph, it catapulted him into international fame, because it moved him from being an obscure inventor of arcane devices to make telegraphy cheaper and better to being an inventor that captured the national imagination. And I think that hold remains with us today because Edison really made it possible for us to preserve the past in a way that had never been able to be done before.
Edison immediately began drawing up lists of ways to use this new technology that he had not anticipated and didn't have any plans for. He thought about recording Last Will and Testament, recording sermons, recording records, what we would call records.
Children's stories. I mean, he had a whole slew of different things that he envisioned, even as commercially viable for. The problem was the technology took a long time to make commercially successful.
However, even without the commercial success, this made him...
Right, this made him the legitimate part. This was the invention of concepts, and it was so astounding. And literally, reporters, the common man, and financiers, being a path to Thomas Edison's work. There were trains coming out to see this wonderful invention. There were people who heard that Edison was thinking about working on the electric light. And so they sent their representatives out to talk to Edison and see if they could get in on the action.
In the fall of 1878, when he did start working on the electric light seriously, he had money.
He had lots of money.
We've got a patent factory. Here, we can turn out inventions to order. Minor invention about every 10 days. And a big trip every 6 months or so.
Menlo Park brought together science and technology in a way that had never been done before. Edison knew that science held the key to achieving radical inventions, and by combining scientific research with the machine shop, he had created the first integrated research and development facility in the world. Menlo Park contradicts the perception of Edison as a 19th century tinkerer, an image which, for reasons known only to himself, Edison was happy to reinforce.
When I start to experiment with anything, I do not read the book. I do not want to know what has been done. I try and experiment and reason out the result somehow by methods, well, which I could not explain.
From the beginning of his career, Edison recognized that invention required more than just working with the technology itself. He needed some sort of basic understanding of the science behind it. So from the very beginning, he studied electricity. As he got into chemistry later on, he studied chemistry, even hired somebody to help him learn chemistry better. He read the basic textbooks. He had manuals around so he could pull them off the shelf and say, okay, what do we know about this particular problem? Okay, and that was always a starting point. What do we know about the problem? But that was never a stopping point. It was always, what can we now learn? How to solve the problem? And he would research until he, in fact, found a solution.
The perception of Edison and other 19th century inventors as talented tinkerers is really, it's demeaning and it's kind of platonic.
But then to actually turn it into something that people would want in the marketplace.
It's not a trivial part of invention. Innovation is as critical to bringing something to reality as sitting down and having a light bulb go off on the internet.
By announcing that he wanted to make his career as a professional inventor, Edison established the idea that technological change would not come about haphazardly in response to local situations, but rather it would be ongoing, that a group of individuals would be constantly making change and responsible for those changes. That's one of the reasons that the pace of change, particularly technological change, has sped up in the last century. You now have individuals who spend their full-time occupations as change makers. Edison also demonstrated to corporations that if they controlled technological development, they could dominate future markets. So by tying science, research, and technological development to corporations, Edison established much of the contours of the modern world.
While teamwork was critical to his success, it was Edison himself who generated most of the original ideas. So where does the process of invention really begin? How does the inventive mind actually work?
I think inventors all have one common thing. They're very keen observers of nature and the world around them, and they sometimes look at things in ways the rest of us don't. The greatest fundamental inventions are usually things that once they've been invented, everybody looks and says, heck, I could have thought of that. The fact of the matter is they didn't. Remember, the person who invented Velcro, I guess this was a Swiss guy, was walking through a field and got some burrs stuck on his coat. Now, every one of us has had burrs stuck on our coat. The point of the matter is that he looked at it and said, maybe I can do something useful with this. It's a lot like Sherlock Holmes looking at a crime scene and drawing his own conclusions that are totally different. I mean, we all see the same picture. We all see the same things. They just come to different conclusions. It's not that they're smarter. They just know the difference between seeing and observing. They take the known and build it into something that's new and unknown.
I could not help laughing at the ease with which he explained his process of deduction. When I hear you give your reasons, I remarked, the thing always appears to me so ridiculously simple that I could easily do it myself, though at each successive instance of your reasoning, I am baffled until you explain your process. And yet, I believe my eyes are as good as yours. Quite so, he answered, lighting a cigarette and throwing himself down into an armchair. You see, but you do not observe.
The distinction is clear. For example, you have frequently seen the steps which lead from the hallway up to this room.
Frequently.
How often?
Well, some hundreds of times.
Then how many are there?
I don't know.
Right. You have seen, yet you have not observed. That's just my point. Now, I know that there are 17 steps because I have both seen and observed. It's important to recognize that the inventive process is not simply having a good idea. The good idea has to be reduced to some sort of practice that is useful, that is easy to make, that is saleable. All of these things enter into it. But the process is one that does involve, number one, thinking about it in a visual way. Number two, probably sketching it out in some way to help you with the visual process. And finally, working with others to realize a three-dimensional model of it to make it happen.
The idea becomes a working reality. But before making an invention public, a crucial step remains. All inventors must think about protecting their ideas, and the patent system comes into play.
Edison clearly understood the patent system not simply as a way to credit himself for his inventions, but also to stake out ground and to basically keep competitors out of the same field that he was in. He also, interestingly, not only patented the end products, he would patent parts of the process of making those end products. Again, understanding the relationship between invention and manufacturability. Edison would tie those two together and try to control them through the patent process.
In a lot of cases, he was spurred by the needs of a customer, for example, Western Union Company, who needed ways to save money on telegraph wire, and this would lead him to develop a product like the duplex telegraph that could send two messages over the same wire at the same time. But there were other situations, and most notable of those being something like the phonograph, where Edison's own curiosity takes him off in a new direction and he discovers something entirely different. So, economic need of a customer can be one driving reason to develop an invention, or simple personal curiosity can be another, and both are very, very important in the case of any inventor, I would argue.
Edison was extraordinarily good at inventing for the market, of seeing some sort of need out there and then addressing that in his laboratory. But just because you come up with an invention that you see is needed doesn't mean that the world is going to come beating a path to your door and ask for it or demand it. Edison understood this, and he was also very good, as it turns out, of dealing with reporters, of bringing them out to Menlo Park, of entertaining them, and of turning them loose to write extraordinarily favorable copy about his work.
I think one of the things that set Edison apart from his contemporaries was his understanding of system in two senses. First, he saw inventing as a systemic process, from understanding the problem to researching a variety of solutions to developing your particular solution to making sure that that could be replicated and then marketing it, making sure that the people who wanted it got your solution to their problems. In the second sense, he understood his own creations as systems. It wasn't just the light bulb. It was the entire lighting system. He made an analogy to the gas system and saw that you had to develop all parts of the system so that he understood the invention as a system as well.
The team, the talent, and the money. He had it all.
Wat doe je daar, papa? Hé.
Studeren.
Koers.
Studeren.
Studeren. Ja, had nog koersstuderen. Nee, ik ga een ontdekkingsreiziger worden.